Hello and welcome to chapter 19, Not Nice. As you can see, Halo, Bermuda's sister, has won the battle for the window for today. Hey girl, say hi to everybody. Say hi. Look, hi. Okay, anyway, close enough. Bermuda's actually here. We have a blanket on the ottoman down there, and Bermuda is loving it. So the other fight is for who gets to sleep on the blanket on the ottoman. And probably if we had two blankets, we would be sleeping on a blanket on the ottoman. You know how it is. Okay, so anyway, so chapter 19, Not Nice. This is the next morning. All right, so we are ready to begin. So we were in a routine now, so the next morning went smooth and easy. The only thing of note that happened was one of the centaurs transformed into a supernatural. The music from the shrine picked up and the lights flashed as the centaurs and lions started dancing and cheering. It was really neat being able to watch from behind the scenes like this. When the transition finished and the line started up again, the centaurs moved through the line at a much bigger, brisker pace than they had yesterday. And Elle must have talked to the council and gotten them to really speed things up. Well, we had a few moments of peace and it was just the two of us. I asked Sandy how the rest of the gang was doing at home. I was pretty sure she talked to John every night through their wedding bands. They are doing fine, she said. In fact, they are probably doing better than fine. John and Tyler are drinking ale and swapping stories. Annabeth tried to hang out with them on the first night, but gave up after that. She shook her head. You know how much they drink. Annabeth never had a chance. So she's been focused on her training and spending a lot of time on the beach. John says she's looking forward to whipping your butt when you get back. I laughed. Annabeth is tough. I admit I'd be scared if she really came for me. So how is Tyler doing? He's doing good, Sandy replied. John says he misses you. He's trying to act all normal and unconcerned, but John knows he's restless and will be glad when you're home again. Aw, my baby missed me. That was nice. So no sign of the Louisville mages, I asked. All has been quiet so far, Sandy replied. I've been thinking about the whole situation that Josette said to you about at Kroger. I don't think Carl is having such an easy time winning as she thought he'd have. How many days has it been since you talked? It took me a moment and I had to count on my fingers, but I finally arrived at 31 days. That is too long of a period of time for a citywide fight. If Carl was that overwhelming, he should have been able to find and absorb all the power from the rotten mages by now. I think there is something else going on. I hadn't realized how many days had gone by. Sandy was right. It seemed like he should have attacked the house by now. So what do you think is going on? I asked. I don't know for sure, of course, but I think it might be one of either two things. First, it might be another rival faction that he can't find, or maybe he can't defeat them. If that's the case, then we have time to prepare as long as the stalemate exists. The second option could be that he's won the war, but he still doesn't have enough power to take out the house. After all, we stopped an awful lot of mages last time, and they were well prepared. We talked about it a bit more, but without information we were just guessing. Neither of us were happy that we didn't know what was going on, but there wasn't anything we could do about it here. Oh, I just realized something. Oh, well, there we go. Once breakfast was done, we headed out with Bermuda and met up with Balaji and Amaya at our first discussion, just like normal. That was the last regular thing of the day, because after that, things got weird. The discussion started out in typical fashion. The head of household arrived, and we all clapped politely when she stepped onto the speaker's platform. She started her discussion, and it was funny and informative, just the way I like it. Then she got interrupted by a question. The guy asking was blunt and aggressive, almost rude. He asked how she was dealing with the rats in her house. I'm sure she thought he was talking about real rats, as she looked very confused and said the house didn't allow small mammals unless they were pets or bonded with the supernatural in some fashion. "I'm not talking about mammals, you stupid woman," he said. "I'm talking about fresh supernatural rats, the ones that invade your house and steal your magic. How can you call yourself a responsible mage if you don't even know what a rat is?" Being attacked like this was very unexpected, and the speaker just stammered at him. Clearly he'd caught her off guard, and she had no idea what to say. "This is your leadership?" The guy turned to address the room. "This is the woman who would protect you and guide you in this time of crisis?" He turned back to the speaker and spat on the floor at her feet. "You are worthless." He whirled around and addressed the audience once more. "Wake up, people. Clean your houses. Learn how to become responsible mages and protect yourself and your loved ones from the rat invasion." He gestured and a complicated symbol appeared in the air. It sort of looked like one of those QR codes you scan with your phone, except this was in 3D. He kept on ranting like this for several minutes, and no one moved to stop him. More and more mages gradually got over their shock, and I could see by the glances that everybody was waiting for someone else to make the first move. "Why don't they just take him out?" I asked Balaji softly. "Normally they would, but it's forbidden to fight at the gathering. This guy is being very rude, but he's not actually hurting anyone. I think that is part of his plan, as anyone that stops him may actually get kicked out of the gathering and forced to pay him a fine. So let's just stay calm and see what develops." What ended up happening was 3 of the support staff from House ATAC showed up and escorted him from the room. He went peacefully, but he yelled the whole time about being a responsible mage and the others in the room needed to wake up. The symbol he'd put in the air stayed there until one of the volunteers came back and removed it. "What was that thing?" I asked Sandy. "It's a link to a view," she said, "sort of like a short URL for a YouTube video. I'm sure it's entry-level propaganda teaching people how to hate new mages." "So, sort of like the mundane world," I said sadly. "Unfortunately, yes," Sandy agreed. "The mundane and the supernatural worlds could learn a lot from each other, but in this case, it is something I wish hadn't transferred over. In situations like this, though, the supernatural world is a lot better. That view won't stay up for long." "You can report views like that?" I asked. "That doesn't work so well on YouTube. It takes forever for a video to be reviewed, and by that time it might have been seen by millions of people." "Oh no," Sandy said. "That view will be down by the end of the day, if not sooner. I'm sure of it. You see, unlike the corporate world where people can hide their identities, in the supernatural world everything is owned by someone. So there is a real person that put up that view and created the link. I'm sure someone here will challenge whoever that is and get it removed shortly." "If they challenge, won't that get them kicked out of the gathering?" I asked. "Oh no, a view has nothing to do with the gathering. It counts as an official duel, and those can happen at any time regardless of where you are." "Couldn't they just make hundreds of copies like this and post links to different ones?" I asked again. "I'm just thinking of how things work in the mundane world, and that's what could happen here." "They certainly could have multiple copies," Sandy agreed, "but the bank charges pearls to post every one. The more they post, the more it costs them. When the views get taken down, there are no refunds, so it's just a waste of magic. If there's one thing mages hate, it's wasting magic." The other thing that's going to limit how viral this becomes is that mages following the link have to pay to see the view. It's not much, but again, mages hate wasting magic. Though she was visibly shaken by what had happened, the head restarted her talk and received a thunderous round of applause for her efforts. The rude interruption was the talk of the gathering until the next discussion when it happened again. This time the support staff showed up much quicker, and again the mage left raving about how the rat swarm was coming. I thought Bermuda might go all John Wick on these bastards, but he was content to just sit back and enjoy the show. At the third discussion, the head took care of the guy himself. As soon as the questioner started to act belligerent, he surrounded him in some sort of force shield that muffled sound. The guy screamed and raved, but he looked like a total lunatic, and nothing he could say could be heard. The support staff was already in the room waiting for trouble, so they hauled him away pretty quickly. We all breathed a sigh of relief as the speaker started to over, only to be interrupted by a second mage. This time there wasn't any support staff in the room to shut him down, and I guess whatever charm the speaker had used the first time was out of juice. So this guy got to rant for a while, and this time he came for us. House Louisville was full of rats. Sandy was a rat lover, and she was a rat herself. She was the antithesis of what a responsible mage embodied. She was derelict in her duties and should be stripped of her house and a real mage put in charge. Sandy just smiled at him sweetly, like he was a simple child that had been dropped on his head as a baby. She wasn't taking him seriously at all, and he just deserved her pity. It absolutely infuriated him, and he totally got off message and started screaming in rage. Then I saw Amaya's power flex, and suddenly his eyes rolled up in his head and he passed out on the floor. She didn't move, and there was no indication she'd done anything, so I looked around to see if she'd gotten away with it. Everyone seemed focused on the fallen asshole, and nobody was looking accusingly at Amaya, so I thought she was in the clear. I looked over at her and gave her a quick wink. She seemed a bit startled that I knew it was her, but then she gave me a small grin back. I could tell from these talks that some of the heads were great administrators, but lousy fighters. That didn't apply to Amaya. I was pretty sure she could lay some smackdown when it was needed. We were just relaxing, figuring everything was over, when suddenly my gem cells sounded the alarm. They jolted me to full alertness, and I was ready when my magic sight picked up the tomato flying at my head. It was coming fast, like it had been shot out of a potato gun. With no warning, it would have been a nasty shock as it snapped my head forward and bits of tomato and juice splattered everywhere. Instead, I snapped to my feet, caught it, and looked around. There were a lot of surprised expressions, but I couldn't see who'd actually launched the fruit. I decided to just play it cool, so I sat back down and ate it. "Thanks, guys," I told my gem cells. "You are the best." I got back a chorus of "You're welcome" and "Nice catch." Thank goodness they had alerted me. I was pretty sure I'd gone overboard last night, giving them such a huge range of visual and audio detection. Now it seemed like good planning. That was going to be my story moving forward. I wasn't just a lucky bastard. Instead, I had foresight. I was the Steve Jobs of soul creations. "Keep telling yourself that, oh great lucky one," my analytical side said sarcastically. I decided to ignore him and turn to Sandy instead. "They're throwing things at us now." "I can see that," she replied. "I'm going to assume that since it was squishy and wouldn't actually have caused you lasting harm, that they could claim it wasn't really an attack." "That sounds about right," I said. "This group seems to be awfully good at accidents and figuring out how to get around the rules. Maybe we should do a little something like that ourselves." "Oh?" Sandy looked interested. "What did you have in mind?" "Do you still have a rock from the garden?" "No," she said, "but I do have a cherry pit. It wouldn't be as good as a rock, but it should still work." We chatted for a minute and came up with a plan. I summoned my surfer dude again and sent him back behind us to scan the room. Due to my amazing foresight, he was able to use his four eyes to pinpoint who our mysterious assailant was. I also suggested he upgrade to using bat ears. I didn't make them for him, as I wanted to see if he could do it himself, just like when he changed his eyes. He paused for a sec, then his head morphed, and two large bat ears grew up on either side. I asked him if he was going to grow two more, but he shook his head no. I guess two is enough for now. With his heroic build, he now looked like a cross between the Silver Surfer and Batman. I debated changing his name to Bat Surfer, but he seemed more like a surfer dude at the end of the day. I stretched and put my hands behind my head. It wasn't because I was feeling stiff, but rather that I wanted my gem cells to be able to get a good view of the room. For several minutes nothing happened, and then the gem cells warned me again. This time it was an egg, and again I jumped up and caught it. Fortunately it was hard-boiled, or I would have ended up holding a mess. I sat back down as my dude surfed over. "Did you see who it was?" I asked. He gave me a satisfied 2 thumbs up. "Is the cherry pit ready?" I asked Sandy. She'd been working on infusing it with her power. I think so, she said. It's nowhere near as dense as a rock, so I don't know how much heat it's actually going to produce. Plus, it's going to be inside their aura, which will dampen the effect. I have every faith in your abilities, I said as she handed the pit over. I can't wait to see what's going to happen. I held the pit in my hand as I gave my instructions to the surfer. Take the pit and navigate along the floor until you get to the target. Remember to go slowly when you get close so you don't trigger his shield charm. Then find some place in their clothing to place this and get clear. Give me a signal when you're good and I'll have Sandy do the rest. Understood? I got another double thumbs up and Surfer Dude swooped in and picked up the seed. He was only an inch high, so it looked like he was carrying a boulder, but he managed. He floated onto the floor and then he was off. I followed him through my connection and I was surprised at how quickly he could move. Even carrying the pit, he was still really fast. He reached the back of the room right by the entrance, then slowed down and started circling back again. I thought it was a bit strange until I realized he was probably coming up behind our troublemaker. No shield was triggered, and the surfer smoothly left the ground, hovered for a bit, and then smoothly rose up toward the ceiling. Package delivered, he reported. Go time, I told Sandy softly, trying to act casual. She nodded and gave me a bored look, like nothing was going on. I discreetly looked around, but nobody seemed to be paying attention to us. She waited for a long moment, pretending to listen to the speaker, and then I saw her magic flare. Nothing happened. Then she kicked her power up to another level, and suddenly there was a loud shriek behind us. Everyone spun around to see what the new commotion was all about, so naturally we turned around as well. A mage at the back of the room was on fire. He had on a heavy robe with a floppy hood in the back, and I guess the surfer dropped the seat inside, as that was the part that was burning the most. Sandy's first attempt had caused a lot of heat, but his robes had probably protected him. It wasn't any protection against her second attempt, though, as now his robe was well and truly on fire. He shrieked some more and got the hell out of his robe, but now his hair was on fire too. It had been long and luxurious, and probably something he was vain about. Not anymore. Now it was a charred, smoky mess. He continued screaming as he ran to the refreshment table and dumped a whole pitcher of juice over his head. I guess he was afraid he was still on fire as he doused himself with 2 more. I thought some of the mages would jump in and help, but they just stood back and let him deal with it. Maybe they knew he was an asshole and didn't want to get in the way of karma? Finally, he calmed down enough to stop hollering in panic, and for a moment he just stood there, staring at everyone staring back at him. He was a sticky, smoky, burnt mess. He'd also made the unfortunate choice of wearing a green thong that was just a bit too tight. I'm sure it had made him feel sexy under that heavy robe, but now it was on display for everyone to see. It was not cute. Not cute at all. None of his heckler friends showed up to help him, and there was no dignity to be salvaged from the situation, so he quickly turned and bolted from the room. With 2 hecklers and a spontaneous combustion, the speaker didn't have any hope of capturing everyone's attention again, so he just chatted with the few of us that were listening and then stepped down. I felt sorry for him, but he seemed relieved his time was over. I assume that was the work of the 2 of you in there? Balaji asked when we left. I can neither confirm nor deny any rumors, Sandy said in a mysterious voice. Amaya just laughed and winked at Sandy, who winked back. Then we all laughed together. That green thong was just something else. Balaji was really tickled by the whole thing. I know, right? Amaya snickered. It's burned in my brain now. I can't unsee it. We talked about it all the way to the next discussion. This time, volunteers from House ATAC were everywhere. They weren't the nice, helpful-looking volunteers either. They looked tough, like battle mages. Before the speaker arrived, golden sparks started showering out of the center of the platform, and a golden image of the head matron stepped out. She looked pissed. It has come to my attention that many of today's discussions were interrupted in a rude and uncouth fashion. Slurs were spoken and propaganda was distributed. This is not tolerated, and it will not continue. This is the first and only warning to those responsible. Any future such acts will be dealt with in the harshest manner." She paused and looked around the room to make sure she had everyone's attention. "You do not want to test me or this house. Sometimes I'm not very nice." She had pure steel in her voice, and I had no doubt she would stand behind her words. She took one last look around the room, and then her image vanished. Needless to say, there were no more interruptions for the rest of the day. After the last discussion, Amaya and Balaji escorted us back to our suite. They had something else to do that evening, so they couldn't accompany us to the fair. Sandy promised we would be on high alert, but she was looking forward to shopping just as much as I was. Concerned for our safety, they'd wanted us to stay in for the evening, but that wasn't going to happen. CL, NL, and MM were waiting for us in the suite, and once again we had a wonderful supper together. This time they'd moved a table into our sitting room, so we had a proper place to eat and relax. MM had upgraded our dinner cart to a larger size, so we had even more culinary options. We had a spiral ham, turkey and dressing, mashed potatoes, glazed carrots, beets, and crispy Brussels sprouts, and what looked to be bacon drippings. We even had brown gravy and turkey gravy, which just struck me as totally decadent. This was in addition to all our regular stuff like breads and jam with salted butter, fresh fruits, salads, and spreads. This meal, more than any others, occurred to me like a family dinner, and I loved it. Even Bermuda had a hammock-style cat seat at the table with a saucer of meaty snacks. We laughed and told stories from our day, and in the process I learned a few things. Streamlining the process for the centaurs to go through the shrine had made a big difference, as NL was no longer the only mage. Now there were 3 mages and 32 naturals. I asked her if she knew what percentage of the centaurs had been tested, and she said she didn't know for sure. If she had to guess, maybe 10%? The line had been very slow at the beginning. The 3 centaurs were starting to get used to their newfound fame, but they also had more responsibilities, as the freshly transitioned centaur naturals were looking to them for leadership. I didn't have any great answers for them. Amaya would be a much better person for that, but I was enthusiastic and supportive and assured them they would be fine. After all, it wasn't like they were on their own. They had the support of the council and House ATAC to lean on. Everyone was excited for the big healing later tonight. MM said his grandmother was nervous and didn't want anyone to make a fuss over her, so of course that's exactly what I was going to do. She sounded like a wonderful person, and I was looking forward to meeting her. They also mentioned their escorts, and I realized that while we were having a wonderful time in here, the guards that had brought them were standing out in the hallway. After supper, I had MM carry me through the fireplace, and I made a point to greet each one of them and thank them for taking care of my friends. I also signed autographs, and we took a group picture with a camera that was about the size of a marble. It looked so tiny, or I looked so tiny next to all the big burly guards. All of them had bet against me in the fight, but somehow that had been converted into something to be proud of. I didn't follow the logic, but they told me on my next fight, their money was on me. MM would not be hanging with us tonight, as he would be with his grandmother, so it looked like it was just going to be Sandy and me going to the fair on our own. Until CL and NL realized this and said there was no way in hell that was happening. Sandy pointed out that they were fresh supernaturals and there wasn't much they could do yet if it came to a fight. CL correctly pointed out that they could always run and get help. That settled that discussion, and it wasn't long before CL, NL, Sandy, Bermuda, and I all headed out to the fair. I thought Bermuda would want to stay behind and sleep like he normally did in the evenings, but he seemed rare to go though, and I was always happy to have him. I'd also modified my surfer dude slightly and given him a duplicator ring and a resize ring. Now he had my latest 2 gadgets. I duplicated him 3 more times, making sure they were full of magic, and turned them loose to be my eyes in the sky. I felt a lot better knowing they were looking out for us. The halls were familiar enough that I didn't notice them, but CL and NL fell in love with the underwater theme. It was fun pointing things out, and it felt like this was my house for a moment. What did feel strange was going back to the manly staircase and descending down to the first floor. The foyer felt as massive and fresh as when we'd first come through. We went out the front doors, down the stairs at the entrance, and back into the garden, which had now been transformed. Now it was dotted with these tall, skinny, fantastical structures. I wasn't sure what to call them, as I had no real frame of reference for buildings like these. They were about 10 foot on each side, usually with a wide opening, and they went up at least 3 or 4 stories. They were all themed: a sword and a stone, a giant oven, a ball gown, stacked fruit, etc. It kind of felt like I'd wandered into a chess set where the pieces were made by Walt Disney. We wandered into one of the first shops, the classic sword and the stone, and suddenly I could see why it was themed the way it was. This shop was all about weapons, and it was huge. I'd been wondering what it would look like on the inside. A 10 foot by 10 foot square just wasn't big enough to hold very much merchandise. No wonder the shops were all the same strange size. They were just entrances into a much bigger space. In this case, the whole shop had a medieval theme, with the broad cobblestone street in front of us, branching off to different parts of the enlarged space. To the left were staves and shields. To the right were swords, and towards the back were all manner of bows and archery in the archery range. There were training dummies for striking with swords, and those spinning sandbag things for testing out your shields. The place was filled with supernaturals, so it had to be doing a nice business. The whole place seemed fun and inviting. It would be easy to get lost in here for hours, and there was so much to do I wasn't sure where to look at first. A burly man who looked like he bent horseshoes for fun wandered over and introduced himself. "Greetings, fair traveler. Welcome to the Wet's Edge. We boast the finest natural weapons and armor that money can buy. We have all manner of shields, armor, swords, polearms, bows, ranged weapons, and even exotics. If you want to stab 'em or stop 'em, we have what you need." Having said that, he froze for a sec, then smoothly switched into helpful sales mode. "So, what are you searching for today?" Everyone looked at me for some reason. "You are our first shop," I said honestly, "so we are just looking around right now." "Of course," the burly man said loudly. "Feel free to browse our fine selection. Weapons are meant to be used, so pick them up and try them on for size. Talk to our trainers and see what is right for you. Don't be shy. Step right in." He froze again. Which seemed really weird was he froze in mid-blink. "Wet's Edge." He came back to life in mid-sentence. "Perhaps a stiletto for the lady?" He looked at Sandy. "Or a fine shield for you, sir?" He looked at CL. He flexed slightly and stood there waiting for our feedback. Suddenly I realized what I was seeing. "Oh my goodness," I said. "He's an NPC." "Do what?" Sandy looked confused. Actually, they all did. "An NPC, a non-player character." They all looked at me blankly. It's a term used in role-playing games for characters that act like other human players, but aren't. They usually give out quests, provide story and flair to the world, and handle all the shops. This guy looks great, but he's not real. He's just here for the shop. "Of course he's not real, young master." CL looked confused. "He's our shop friend. He will direct us to what we need, answer questions about the products, and haggle on behalf of the store. Do you not have these in America?" "Not at all," I replied. "This guy is like a personal shopper. Only the really high-end stores have them, and I think even then you have to pay extra. If you go into a regular department store, it's almost impossible to find someone to help." "Then how do you know what to buy?" CL continued, "or where to find it?" "You just wandered the store on your own," I said, "and hopefully you find what you need. If there are multiple versions of the product, you just read the packaging to see what will work best." "That sounds very strange." CL looked perplexed. "How do you pay for goods without a shop friend? Are you supposed to haggle with yourself?" "There isn't any haggling," I replied. "You just pay the price that's on the shelf. Once you have all your goods together, you take your cart up to the front of the store, figure out which line you think is the shortest, and wait. Once it's your turn, someone scans your goods, and you pay for them. Then you take your cart to your car, load it up, and head home." "No haggling? And you carry your own goods?" NL sounded outraged. "I can't imagine such a thing. I thought mundane technology was supposed to fix everything. That sounds truly barbaric." Sandy took over at this point and tried to explain a bit more about how a regular store worked. CL and NL were having none of it. The whole concept was weird and unnatural to them. I had to admit, if I was used to a personal shopper, I wouldn't want to go back to finding and carrying my own stuff either. Nobody else was impressed, but I knew that anyone who'd spent time in World of Warcraft or Elder Scrolls, this was amazing stuff. "Okay guys," I said to get their attention, "I could spend all night here playing around, but I'm not looking to buy a weapon. We only have one evening for the fair, so we need to make it count. Does anyone else need weapons or armor?" Nobody did, so we left and went to the next shop. This time it was all about wands. The building was in the shape of a fist holding a wand, which shot sparks into the air every few minutes. I thought the entrance was a bit cheesy, but inside it was nothing but high class. The floor was a thick red carpet, and the whole space was dimmed out. Floating in the air about every 10 feet were wands. They hovered there, bathed in light, and got the royal treatment as if they were high-priced diamonds. Nobody greeted us when they came in, but each wand had its own fairy. There was soft music playing in the background, and the whole shop felt like it was made for high-end jewelry. I didn't realize how right I was until I woke up a sleeping fairy and inquired as to the cost of the wands. She told me they ranged from simple ones at 500,000 pearls all the way up to several million. If we needed something truly specialized, the cost would be higher than that. But we'd need to make an appointment and come back again. I just about shit myself. No wonder getting a charmed weapon as the winner of a tournament was a big deal. We backed away from the wands very carefully, as we certainly didn't want to accidentally break anything in here. The fairy went back to sleep, and we got the hell out of there. I'd hoped they'd had some sort of force wand, but I couldn't afford those prices. We popped our heads into a few stores that looked like they might have interesting stuff, but nothing really caught our eye, and we left quickly. Then we had arrived at a store that looked like an oven, which really caught everyone's attention. The store was filled with household appliances, as well as all sorts of household goods like sheets and towels. The three of them went crazy and oohed and awed over mixers and hand towels, improving drawers for bread, and all kinds of other stuff. I never spend much time in the kitchen, so I just went along with the flow and feigned enthusiasm when needed. I certainly appreciated Sandy's cooking, though, so if she bought something and made delicious food with it, I could get excited about that. To me, it looked like we already had all the electrical version of this back in the US. It really drove home to me how much the mundane world caught up to the magical one. All of this, including the textiles, were available in some version at Target. I was just about to fall apart from boredom when it occurred to me there was a lot of magical items in here that moved. Surely they used a version of the Force Rune? Time to find out. My magical sight could see through anything, so I picked a weird mixer bowl combination appliance and started sorting through its runes. It took a bit, but I eventually found the distinctive 4 sideways L's and 1 topper L that was the Force Rune. It just had straight lines, like Sandy's had, and it didn't seem to be that special, so I moved on. The shop friend in this place was a little fat man in aprons, and as I moved away from the others, I ended up getting my very own friend. I told him I wanted to see things that moved, and that really confused him. He wanted to know what type of cooking I was doing, and seemed anxious to help, but I ended up ignoring him. I found a lot of Force Runes, but none of them had flow, and none of them looked different from Sandy's, so I didn't buy anything. CL purchased something similar to a toaster oven, NL got a bread maker, and Sandy acquired trays that kept food fresh. She said it had the same enchantment on it as the serving cart in her room, and it would be a huge help for her. One of the tricky parts of cooking a meal was having everything ready to eat at the same time. By using the trays, all her food would stay fresh and hot, so it wouldn't matter when she got the food ready. One of the best parts about the shop was we didn't have to carry our purchases around with us. Everything we purchased would be delivered to our rooms in the house. That was super nice. I asked CL if there was a Feather C250 here, but he said something like that would need to be ordered. I was disappointed as I wanted one, and I'm pretty sure everyone else in House Louisville would want one too. We moved on to the next shop, and I couldn't help but marvel at all the variety of stores, especially as we stepped into one shop that sold nothing but lighting. We didn't stay long, but I was amazed at just how different light fixtures could be. They had simple floor lamps that looked like sculptures, clouds of sunlight for the ceiling, and chandeliers made to look like a host of lightning bugs. They even had over-the-shoulder lighting that followed you around and made sure you were never in the dark. Another shop sold experiences, which were like views but utilized all your senses. They charged just to access one of them, as well as a charge every time you experienced it. It was crazy expensive, but it was an amazing way to learn something. I got to experience a free and very short tutorial on learning how to wield a sword. I could feel the trainer's body, how it was balanced, how he held the sword, and how he moved. He also talked the whole time, explaining what he was doing and why. It was sort of like what I'd done with Tyler when he was showing me how to punch and move. It wasn't that good though, as I'd been able to feel Tyler's magic as well. This was just the normal senses, no magic. The experience shop wasn't just useful for training either. They had collected experiences from people who had seen the original plays by Shakespeare and had heard performances by Mozart and Beethoven. Of course, this was also the perfect vehicle for porn, and it featured a vast array of people getting it on in a wide variety of places. It wasn't just people either. There were half people, mythological creatures, and even historical figures. If you wanted to know how good a lover Ernest Hemingway was, you could pay for the experience to find out. We did find a few shops that showed charms, but they were somewhat like the wand store. They were strictly no touch and no scan. They even wanted me to pay a fee before I could examine them. It made me look at all the charms Sandy carried around in a new light. If what she had was worth even half of what these shops were charging, she was carrying around a fortune. Sandy attempted to talk about charm making and crafting with a few of the real people in the store, but they clammed up quickly. They viewed her as a competitor who was out to steal their secrets, and we were quickly shown the door. As we moved further away from the front of House ATAC, the shops became a little smaller and a little less fancy. This was really noticeable when we stepped off the main path and ventured out into the garden. They still had shop friends, but many times the owner of the shop was out on the floor as well. There was less spectacle, and the shop fronts were a lot plainer looking. On the plus side, the shops felt much more personal and inviting. As the shops got smaller, the quality of the merchandise didn't drop. Instead, the merchants found creative ways to cram in as much as they could and still have a fun display. I suggested to the others that we fully embrace the adventure and step away off the main path. Sandy was having as much fun as I was with these new intimate showrooms, and she was more than ready to see what was on the edges. CL and NL, they didn't care. They were down for whatever we wanted, so we skipped a bunch of the storefronts and headed towards the back side of the garden. And that ends our reading today. So tomorrow, obviously, we get into more shops and all kinds of fun and exciting stuff. So anyway, see you guys next week.